Let's get right to our guest host. Texas Senator Ted Cruz joins us this morning. It's great to have you on set, Senator, and we'll get into specifics, but I don't know whether you saw our interview with Congressman Messer. You know, he said the House should be able to get it to the Senate by November. And I said, well, what does that mean? That the Senate can decide not to do anything even earlier than if you get it to them in December? We're cynical. We're cynical having seen what's happened, and it's like wrangling cats in the Senate right now.
Look, Joe, you have a good reason to be cynical. And a lot of people across the country are ticked off. We've got a Republican president, Republican heads of every agency, Republican majorities in both houses of Congress, and right now we're not delivering. We're not getting the job done, and people are frustrated. I'm frustrated. I promise you, as frustrated as you are, I'm banging my head into it every day. And I think we've got an incredible opportunity, an opportunity that doesn't happen very often. Unified control of government for Republicans historically has been quite rare. And it has been the Senate that hasn't been able to deliver. You look at over Obamacare, those were maddening. And we were not able, we've got an excruciatingly narrow majority, 52 Republicans. That means if any 3 Republicans jump ship, we're toast. Wrangling together 50 out of 52 Republicans with this very diverse, fractious conference is not easy. All of that being said, I believe we will get tax reform done. I think
this year?
I think it'll either be late this year or early next year. I think we're early in the debate. It's going to take at least a couple of months just to wrangle out. There are a lot of back and forths that are going to happen in tax reform. But I do think virtually every Republican wants to get to yes. And I think that's a really important precondition to getting it done.
Yes on what? Meaning what do you think it ultimately looks like? Are we talking about a 20% corporate tax rate? Is that the number that you think could actually get passed? Most of the conversation, at least that I've heard, at least behind the scenes, has been at 23, maybe 24, 20, something like that. And then how do you deal with the individual rates?
Look, I hope we see a big tax cut. I hope we lower the corporate rate. I'd like to see the corporate rate, yes, at 20. I'd like to see it at 15. I'd like to see real tax cuts for working men and women. I think we need to be, you know, the test for delivering is, are we delivering to the plumber in Michigan? Are we delivering to the single mom waiting tables in Texas? And if we are, that's a good tax cut. Now the things that matter on that are A, individual rates that people are paying. But B, I think front and center, the biggest concern should be jobs and economic growth, that we need pro-growth tax cuts. We need tax cuts. And by the way, the word cut is important. I think this should be an unapologetic tax cut, not just tax reform, but a real tax cut to generate booming economic growth.
But there are others in your party who think you're also may be delivering hugely on the debt and the deficit.
Well, and so that's a big argument we're having internally within the conference, is whether this should be a tax cut or not. And, you know, there are a handful of moderates in the Senate Republican Conference that style themselves deficit hawks. And I actually disagree with them. You know, we've had some real knockdown, drag-out battles over lunch where I'm taking the other side. Nobody cares more about the deficit and debt than I do. It was one of the big reasons I ran for Senate, because we got $20 trillion in debt and we're bankrupting our kids. But here's the honest truth. This Congress is never going to cut enough to turn around the debt. We're simply not going to do it. You look at the agony the Senate had over very modest reforms in Medicaid, one of the 3 big entitlement programs. The only way to pay down the debt is economic growth. And economic growth is the 800-pound gorilla. The problem we have is that we've been trapped for 8 years in anemic growth. From 2008 to today, growth averaged 1.2% a year. As you know, the historic average going back to World War II is 3.3%. If we're at 1% and 2% growth, you can't tackle the debt. If we're back at historic levels, 3, 4, 5% growth, suddenly the debt, think about the last time we had a surplus. It was in the 90s, coming out of 12 years of Reagan-Bush, out of major tax cuts, and the booming economic growth gave us a surplus paying down the debt. If we want to do it again, if you want to see Reagan-style economic growth, you've got to have Reagan-style tax cuts And the so-called deficit hawks saying, well, let's not cut taxes because I care about the debt. They're working against what they say they're advancing.
The scary thing is that the Reagan-style growth is now, people have changed the narrative on the left right now. And the dogma now, and they can just say it without really proving it, is that trickle-down didn't work in the past. It caused the financial crisis. It blew out the deficit. The Reagan boom was illusory. It generated large deficits. So all you have is one side of the aisle that even believes in any of these things, that even believes that lower corporate rates will be growth or that tax cuts bring growth. So it's only the right, and you can't get those guys. That's why when the Democrats do something, they're like they come prepared when they're going to do something, and they don't break ranks, and that's why we have Obamacare, and that's why we have other things.
There's legitimate analysis, by the way, from conservatives and liberals about the ramifications of the tax plan, and even if you believe in dynamic scoring, that it's unclear at minimum to suggest that it easily pays for itself. So I think even the senator would agree with that.
This is an example of what I'm talking about, that there will be people that say that the past actually isn't what you think it was, and that the growth we thought we saw in the 80s wasn't really there, and that these tax cuts don't work, and that pro-growth doesn't work. So you're not going to get Democrats. You need every Republican. You need every Republican.
So Joe, the beauty of this argument is that facts matter, and this is a show that focuses on facts and real data. Prior to Obama, the last 4-year period where economic growth was averaged less than 1% a year was 1978 to 1982. So it was coming out of Jimmy Carter. It was the same economic policies. Cause and effect.
We've seen the GDP comparisons overlaid, the Obama GDP for 8 years versus the Reagan GDP. It doesn't matter. They'll say that the deficit blew out. They don't take into account winning. They don't take into
account where the solution matters, because what happened in 81, Reagan came in. We saw a major tax. We saw, again, major tax reform in 86, and the economy exploded. Andrew, you know what GDP growth was in 1984?
And the deficit blew out, though.
Well, hold on a second. Let's focus on GDP for a second. I'll address the deficit.
Okay.
Any idea what GDP growth was in 84?
Give me the number.
7.2%.
What did it average for those 8 years?
Those are crazy.
Over 4.
7.2. Those are China numbers. Those are India numbers. You look at even the most bullish voices in Washington, they say, we'll get 3% growth. My view is, why aim small if we actually have a real tax cut? And in terms of the deficit, by the way, federal revenues skyrocketed. You want to know why the deficit grew?
Because we grew our defense budget in a huge, meaningful way.
And because Tip O'Neill was Speaker, and the Democrats, as revenues grew, they spent even more. Yes, it is true that if Congress spends even more than the new tax money you raise, the deficit will go up. But if you look at revenues, Reagan cut taxes, and revenues, what the federal government got, went up. And not only that, the wealthy ended up paying a higher percentage of taxes. The working men and women did much better because we cut taxes and had economic growth.
Let's talk about taxes today, though. You have a smaller base of people who are paying taxes. It's not the situation that you were dealing with back in 1986. If you're going to hand tax cuts out, the bulk of those benefits will go to the wealthiest people because they're paying the bulk of the taxes. And that's a pretty tough message to try and get out.
See, I actually think it's a very easy message if we focus on growth. That growth should be the central concern. Why is it? Because growth impacts most the people at the bottom of the economic ladder. People like in 1957, when my dad was washing dishes at 50 cents an hour. If you're a young person and you got your first job out of school, what you want to see is booming economic growth, so you suddenly have 2, 3, 4 other job offers. You have competing employers driving up your wages.
But it's a tougher message to say that you're not necessarily see this in your next paycheck. You're not necessarily going to see this at the end of the year in your federal taxes. It's not going to make as big of a difference.
Well, that's why we need to focus on a real tax cut, and a tax cut that impacts working men and women, that impacts, a family trying to say, do I have enough money for braces for my kids? That's what our focus needs to be. And if we do that, the beauty of growth is it expands opportunities for everyone, but especially those. Look, if you're already rich, economic growth doesn't make a huge difference. You're going to be rich with or without it. The people, it makes a difference.
The Fed stays at zero and your assets get parked up.
You get free money.
Right.
Stagnant growth. The Obama economic growth of the last 8 years essentially calcifies our socioeconomic strata. So the rich do great.
Well, made it worse.
But working men and women, by the way, the people that fueled Trump's election in 2016, they get left out of the cold.
But you do appreciate, at least at the tax plan that's been proposed as such, people look at it and they look at the pass-through rate, for example, and they say, the majority of people that are going to get the pass-through rate of 25% that are going to improve their lot in life are truly the wealthy. They look at the estate. They look at the estate tax, and I can make the philosophical argument about why there should be no estate tax. But in terms of economic growth, it becomes a harder argument to make.
But with all respect, Andrew, that's not true. You know what? The billionaires, they don't pay the estate tax. The really rich, they don't pay the death tax. They hire lawyers and accountants. They do generation-skipping trusts. You think the George Soroses of the world are paying the death tax? No. The people who pay the death tax, who I talk to all the time, are farmers out in West Texas who are growing cotton, who are struggling hard, and when they pass on, the next generation has to sell the farm in order to pay the federal government. The people that pay the estate tax are small business owners that have a small factory that when the patriarch passes on, generation sells the factory and fires the workers. That's what the death tax is all about. The super rich don't pay it anyway, and that's the one thing Bernie Sanders said in the last campaign that was right. He said the system is rigged. He's right. Washington is rigged for the super wealthy. If we want to answer the mandate of this last election, we need growth for the working men and women.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's get back to our guest host for the hour, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who has joined us here on set. And we continued this conversation, Senator, just about the tax debate while we were the commercial break. One of the things that people in this area in particular have been so focused on is the state and local tax deductions. Obviously, it's a big deal for states like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California. Can you promise that the waitress in New Jersey, that the plumber in Connecticut will be paying lower taxes as a result?
Look, if we can't, we've got a real problem. And the next several months are going to be hammering out the details of the tax cut, but that's going to be front and center for me. Are we improving the lives? Are we improving the take-home pay? Are we improving the prospects of working men and women? You know, you asked about deducting state and local taxes. I think we should end that deduction, in significant part because that federal deduction encourages high-tax states to jack up the taxes even more. And so it's the federal government encouraging Democrats to raise taxes which hurt the people in blue states. But here's the important question, and it goes to what you said. We can end that deduction if we're lowering the tax rate enough that people, even in those blue states, are seeing a net tax reduction. If we're not lowering the rates enough, if we come out of this and a working family in Orange County is seeing their taxes go up because Republicans got elected, we did something really wrong. And it's why what we're debating right now is the antecedent question to tax reform, which is we're passing through the budget resolution and the level of the tax cut matters. Now, the Senate Budget Committee has set it at $1.5 trillion on a static basis, which means ignoring economic growth, ignoring incentives. I think that's a mistake. I think we should be going much bigger and much bolder, because on a dynamic basis, you're looking at essentially little to no net tax cut. And if you're being deficit neutral, what you're doing is everything you empty out of one bucket, you're pouring into another. The reason that matters is we're not going to have the votes to eliminate the state and local tax deduction unless we're cutting the rate enough to lower the net tax payment, even in blue states. We need to be lowering taxes for everyone. Right. And that's also
But then it makes it even harder to make the numbers work, right? I mean, that's the other conundrum.
Back to dynamic scoring, saying that's the way.
And let's focus on business for a second. So there's a debate within Congress. Do you have immediate expensing for capital expenses, or do you lower the corporate rate? My answer is both. If you look at the analysis, you look at the scoring, immediate expensing is incredibly pro-growth. If a farmer buys a tractor, he can immediately expense it. If a steel factory buys new equipment, the factory can immediately expense it. That produces jobs. It raises wages. It helps working men and women. Now, folks on the other side say, well, gosh, we'd rather lower the corporate rate. If we're doing a small tax cut, you have to choose between one or the other. If we're doing an unapologetic Reagan style, we are cutting taxes because we want to see the economy growing 3, 4, 5%, We can do both, and that's profoundly progressive.
Let me ask you, though. You mentioned that there's so much division even within the Republican caucus on this. If you get to a tax cut that winds up raising some taxes on some of those working families because it's not going low enough to lower their bills, would you vote for that?
Look, if we don't lower people's taxes, we will have failed at our task. Getting to 50 is not going to be easy. Nobody is going to get everything they want. There are going to be compromises. There are going to be trade-offs back and forth. I believe we can do it. What I can tell you is I am spending literally every waking moment trying to bring Republicans together, trying to develop consensus and bring together people all across, to use the phrase, to unite the clans and to say, look, let's just deliver on what we promised. We can do it. And if we got an election coming up next year. Whether 2018 is a great year for Republicans or a terrible year for Republicans is in our hands and our control. If we deliver, if we get a big tax cut, if we repeal Obamacare and the economy is booming, we could pick up 4, 5, 6 Senate seats.
Senator,
if we do nothing, we could get obliterated.
Senator, the establishment Republicans watched in horror as Donald Trump got elected president, and their complaint was that we have no idea what this guy's going to do. We don't know if he's a Republican. We don't know if he's a conservative. Would you, in your view, has he been governing, or at least trying to govern, as a Republican and as a conservative? And these same establishment Republicans that were pointing a finger at him haven't brought the goods to further conservative causes. This has not been his fault. He's tried to govern as a Republican, hasn't he?
Joe, you're exactly right. If you look at the substantive policy from this president and this administration, by and large, the substantive policy has been excellent. Gorsuch was a home run. And actually, judicial appointments across the federal bench at the district court and courts of appeals are strong, principled constitutionalists. It's one of the brightest points.
These guys can't stand success. What do they? They don't want to win. They want to
reg reform. Reg reform is a big deal. If you care about economic growth, my number one priority is economic growth. There are two big levers for government: tax reform and reg reform. Reg reform, they've done terrific. Pulling out of the Paris climate deal. That was a big deal. I spent 45 minutes on Air Force One making the case to the president why we should pull out of the Paris climate deal. He was getting lobbied like crazy by big CEOs on the other side saying, let's stay in it. He was getting lobbied within the administration, a number of folks in his administration. He did the right thing.
And yet, to some degree, we are staying in it.
Well, but I'll tell you.
I would think that you'd be frustrated with that.
We have to follow through. There's no doubt follow through matters. But, he pulled out on a Thursday. The next day, Friday morning, the president called me and said, well, Ted, I did it. What do you think? And I actually responded by invoking my wife, Heidi. And I said, well, Mr. President, let me tell you what Heidi said this morning. She picked up the Wall Street Journal, and she saw right across the front a quote from your speech where you said, I was elected by the people of Pittsburgh and not the people of Paris. And Heidi said, you know what, that's exactly right. And my message to the president that morning, I said, Mr. President, everyone who hates you is ticked off right now. And everyone who loves you is thrilled. If you look at the reg reform agenda, this administration's delivering. If you look at the legislative agenda, for a decade, voices in the media and sometimes in leadership said, oh, it's the crazy conservatives that are the impediment to getting things done. Listen, it's the conservatives who are leading the charge to deliver on this legislative agenda, and the people who are voting no, who are taking it down,
clay feet,
are the folks who for years told us they know how to govern. Great. If you know how to govern, how about step up and do it, and let's get together and get to 50 and get the job done.
What do we have had, I've talked to you not on air about health care and Obamacare. So these recent moves that we've seen yesterday with the president, what's going to happen because of lower cost plans being available now and groups getting together and selling across state lines? It's going to make Obamacare, it's going to exacerbate the problems there. It's going to help certain people, but it's going to make that system even tougher for pre-existing conditions and maybe for older people. Well, how's this going to play out? What's he trying to do right now? What will this force?
Well, the administration's steps on health care, I think, have been positive. What they announced this week expanding association health plans.
We're going to have to come back to this. I think. I'm sorry, Senator. What data do we have? We got data.
I'll tell you about the data. The Senator's be back with us in just a moment.
Sorry to interrupt you,
It's
Senator.
CPI and retail sales. We'll get you that at 8:30. Come on back, and then we're going to get back in the conversation with the Senator. Back in a moment. Texas Senator Ted Cruz. We want to talk about health care, Iran, so many other things. But I want to ask you one thing about the White House, which is earlier this weekend, as you know, Senator Corker called the White House and the president an adult daycare center. And I just wanted to get your reaction to that. How well do you think that the White House is functioning? And what do you think of what he said?
Look, I think it's unfortunate that you've got Republicans squabbling. I was at dinner last night, and woman I was talking to said, all right, is Washington, is it like a high school or a junior high? And my answer, I said, oh, no, I wish we had the maturity of high school. It is a junior high right down to the cliques. It is like the movie Mean Girls. I wish people would stop bickering and engaging in the personal insults. It's not productive. We've got a job to do. And, what I hear from Texans is enormous frustration that this moment in time with unified government is fleeting. And if we blow this opportunity, it may not come again. And so my standard approach, every day as you walk down the halls in the Capitol, reporters run to you and say, what do you think about the latest tweet? What do you think about the latest insult from one to another, another? I don't care about any of that. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm not going to get into the political circus. I'm going to focus on substance and policy. Let's deliver on tax cuts. Let's deliver on reg reform. Let's get the economy growing. Let's repeal Obamacare. And if we do that, I think good policy is good politics. The politics takes care of itself if we're delivering results.
Okay, let's go back to this issue of repealing Obamacare, something that you have talked about for a very long time that is still been something that the party has been unable to do. The president has tried to undo as much as he could effectively in the last 24 hours. What are the implications?
Well, I think the president and the administration have taken positive steps. He announced this week that they're going to promulgate regulations to expand association health plans. That's a good thing. What an association health plan lets people do is if you're in the individual market, if you're in the small group market, it lets you join together in a larger group and get big group prices. The biggest reason people hate Obamacare is it's caused premiums to skyrocket. This is a positive step to get around that, but it will not solve the underlying problem. It's going to take Congress to solve the problem.
For the lowest income people in America, though, it will hurt them and their ability to receive health care.
Okay, that's simply false. And let's go 6.5 million. That's how many people the IRS fines every year because they don't have enough money to afford health insurance. Let me talk about Texas, my home state. It's about 1 million people a year who get a fine from the IRS. Of those, about 40% make $25,000 a year or less. About 80% make $50,000 a year or less. So Andrew, I mean, let's say you're a single mom. You're making less than $25,000 a year. You're waiting tables. You're struggling. You don't have the money to afford health care because Obamacare has driven the premiums through the roof. And the IRS comes along and fines you on top of that because you don't have enough money. That's not helping her.
What the first move that you just talked about will do is some of the healthier people out of the Obamacare exchanges, leave the people who are less healthy there paying bigger bills. But more importantly, the president's second move was to get rid of the subsidies to help people at the bottom end pay for some of those things. And that will push premiums higher, just from some of the states that have already asked. Some of the states asked the insurers to give, under these subsidies continuing, what would your premium increase be for 2018? Without that, what would it be? And some of them went from 10% or just under 10% to just over 20%. Now, you can ask legally whether these things are even should be there, since Congress never sanctioned any of it. But the end result is it will weaken the Obamacare exchanges.
It's worth noting, though, these subsidies are not actually for people. They are bailouts for insurance companies. It's billions of dollars to insurance companies. And here's a bit of trivia. So the Democrats' rhetoric for Obamacare is we care about the little people, not the rich. You know what's happened to insurance company profits under Obamacare?
They've gone up significantly.
They've doubled.
Talk about that when we talk about that on the earnings here, on the earnings that we cover every time here. But if you don't have those insurance companies there, who provides the insurances for the exchanges? And so many of them don't want to even do it.
I will say this: if we end up just doing massive bailouts for insurance companies and not doing anything to help the people whose rates have skyrocketed, we will be profoundly failing. And I believe we can still get Obamacare done. I haven't given up on it, and my message to my colleagues, we can't give up. For 7 years, the central promise Republicans have made is if you elect us, we'll repeal Obamacare. Was it frustrating and maddening that twice we fell one vote shy? Yes. But I still think we can get there. I can tell you in the last several weeks I have met with numerous of my colleagues, especially the people who were no votes, asking, all right, what's it going to take to get you to yes? And I think the approach that gets it done is starting with consensus reforms. I'm trying to find reforms that all 52 Republicans agree with and build up from there. And the key...
So where can we meet versus where are we divided?
And the key is to lower premiums. And the way you lower premiums is more competition, more choice, more consumer freedom. If you give consumers more options and prices fall, that's a win for everyone.
Just politically, though, to this point, Obamacare has been the Democrats' issue. Now the Democrats are increasingly going to say that it fell apart because the Republicans, because Donald Trump stripped all of these things and made it collapse upon itself. So just from the political perspective, do you own it at this point?
Oh, look, the Democrats are going to blame everything on Donald Trump. You know, that's going to be their talking point. The reality is Obamacare is collapsing. It's not working. There are a lot of counties in Texas, a lot of counties across the country where you've got one or even no options on the Obamacare exchanges. And it's one of the reasons Congress has to step up and actually, you know, we've talked a lot in this show about working men and women. You look at the 29ers and the 49ers. The 49ers are the millions of small businesses that are at 47, 48, 49 employees. They won't grow to 50 because 50 is where Obamacare kicks in. The 29ers are the millions of people in this country forcibly reduced to 27, 28, 29 hours a week because Obamacare defines full-time as 30. The people getting hurt are not the rich guys. The people getting hurt are the people struggling, and that's who Obamacare has done enormous damage to. It was one of the big factors that led to the Republican takeover in 2010, the Republican takeover of the Senate in 2014, and the victory in 2016, and it's why it's so maddening. We've had 3 massive elections. Now we got to deliver on the promise.
49ers are 0-5, I think, too. No, so people said, now that you
know what? If they stood up during the anthem, they'd be
now that, yeah, exactly, I wasn't going to mention that. But people said, if the Republicans screw this up, you have single payer. That's going to be the end result. Do you think within 5 years there's single payer here? And the reason I bring it up, I'm not sure how you argue necessarily and win against argument. Now, over in the UK, we've been talking about this article today, 1 million people a week can't get get an appointment with a GP. It's 54% the amount of time that you wait over there, but people will swear by how that's the way to go over there. Is it better to have everyone covered where no one can really get an appointment, or is it better? Would you rather have 27 million people not covered, heading back to emergency rooms? Is that the answer? What do we want as society? That's what we have to ask ourselves, and I don't know what is the answer.
So you're right that Washington Democrats, they are moving towards socialized medicine. One of the biggest changes coming out of 2016 is almost every single Senate Democrat, the lesson they took was that Hillary Clinton was too moderate, and they need more Bernie Sanders and more Elizabeth Warren. That is the heart of the Democratic Party. So, for example, you got a ton of Democratic senators that are all signed on board with fully socialized medicine. And the reality, if you look at any country that has socialized medicine, you end up with less quality, rationing, waiting periods. You end up with the government telling you if you're an older person, you want a hip replacement, you know what, you're too old, you don't get the hip replacement. There's a reason why, for example, you get about 50,000 people a year from Canada coming down to America to get surgeries and health care because they can't get it in Canada.
But is it better that some people have great health care and some people have none, or is it better that everybody has average health care?
There's a reason, Joe, that people from all over the world come to America for health care, because we have innovation, we have better results.
But in fairness, wealthy people come to the U.S. for health care.
And everyone else would if they could afford it.
And
the point is the health care here is better.
Wealthy people in the UK go to doctors because they don't use the system.
And
they have their own private insurance.
And the question is, how do you help the people at the bottom and allow for perhaps a private market at the top, right? I mean, the question is there a hybrid model? Question for you on Iran. Just when you get react to what the president has said, he's sort of punted it now back to Congress to figure out where the red line should or should not be in terms of reimposing sanctions.
It is the right thing to decertify.
For him to decertify.
For him to decertify. The certification is every couple of months the president has to certify to Congress that Iran is complying with the Obama nuclear.
So you believe he's done the wrong thing?
No, I think he did the right thing. He's decertifying. Now, the next question is, what should we do? I think we should reimpose sanctions. The administration can reimpose sanctions. That would be the right thing to do. Congress can reimpose sanctions.
You're the right of him, then. He's not going to do that.
Well, and listen, in the presidential campaign, this was an area where we had a significant disagreement. When I was campaigning, I promised that if I'd been elected on day one, I would have ripped to shreds this Iran deal.
I didn't like the Iran deal in the first place, but now that it's been put in place and other nations around the globe have kind of signed off on this, if we decertify, it gives Iran the position of saying, hey, we did what we were supposed to do. We're going to go ahead with what we're doing and go back to rebuilding our nuclear program, and we can't get anybody else to sign off.
But the problem is they're doing that now. The Iran deal.
UN Watchdog says no.
But they can't actually monitor the sites. The Iran deal set military sites off limit for inspections. Well, guess where they're doing the nuclear work on the military sites? It has other sites where Iran self-inspects. They literally send in Iranian inspectors and we take their word for them. It was designed to allow cheating. And Becky, we're reliving history. Look, all of us are dealing with the enormous challenges North Korea presents because you've got Kim Jong-un, an unstable dictator with nuclear weapons. It's worth pausing and saying, how did North Korea get nuclear weapons? And the way they got it was in the 1990s, Bill Clinton led the world in relaxing sanctions against North Korea in exchange for a promise from Kim Jong-il not to build nuclear weapons. What did he do? He took the billions of dollars, built nukes. The very same person that negotiated the failed North Korea deal is who President Obama and Hillary Clinton recruited to come back to government to negotiate the Iranian deal. Literally the only person on earth out of 7 billion people who's screwed this up already. They brought her back and said, do it again. And this Iranian deal, if the Ayatollah Khamenei gets nuclear weapons, I think the odds are unacceptably high that he would use them. And so I believe we should reimpose sanctions. We should use every tool, economic, diplomatic, and if necessary, military, to make clear that the Ayatollah will never get nuclear weapons. Because if he does, when he chants death to America and death to Israel, I believe him. I don't think that's rhetoric. I think he means it with a religious zealotry that's scary.
I'm glad we sucked up to them while we were pushing Israel away. That's beautiful. Hey, so you agree with Paris? You agree with the attempts with Obamacare? You agree with this healthcare stuff? Do you agree with that military escapade in Syria when he was doing?
Look, I think it was a limited response.
Short of other than the tweets and maybe the personal attacks, what policy you like Gorsuch? What policy decision has Trump done that you disagree with? And is he governing like a President Cruz would have governed?
You know what? There's no value in second guessing.
You want him to get reelected? You think he'll finish out the first term? In your view,
I think the test success for all of us is going to be: did we deliver on tax reform? Did we deliver on Obamacare?
And the test for him or the test for Republicans?
The test for both. I mean, the president's success depends on that also. I think the president is very frustrated with Congress. I'll tell you what I'm trying to do is do everything I can to pull that consensus together. And I will say, Joe, I think I'm in a fairly unusual position in being able to speak with real credibility to conservatives.
Right.
But also able to speak to moderates and to leadership and to the president and the administration and just say, look, let's all get together. Nobody gets everything, but what's the Venn diagram? What's the overlap of what you want and you want where we can deliver real results? And details matter in this. Understanding how tax reform works, how Obamacare works, that matters in terms of getting to yes.
I agree. You are in a unique position, Senator, and we've talked about it not on air. Your stock soared after I thought it was in trouble, briefly, and it soared. And there's, I think, a lot of Republicans that used to say Ted Cruz is like, oh well, he's just way too conservative. I think they look at you now and think you're a very viable, possible.
Would you
future
ever run against the president?
Yeah.
No interest in doing so. I did. We had a vigorous campaign, and he won. I want to see this president be a smashing success. And the way that this president and this presidency is a smashing success is we deliver economic growth. I'll tell you, in January, I called the president right after he was sworn in. I said, Mr. President, we get tax reform, reg reform, and Obamacare done. If the economy is growing 4 or 5% GDP, you'll be reelected in a landslide. Nothing else will matter if we have booming growth. That remains my focus.
We're going to continue this conversation. We'll slip in a very quick break. When we come back, we have more with the senator.
Our guest host is our Senator Ted Cruz. I was going to say, can you come back and we'll do this again? And I was like, well, he's got to go to the Senate. They have a lot of important stuff to do. And then I was thinking, maybe you should come back. Nothing's going on there.
Maybe getting more done.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, we'll see. So, House Houston, what are you hearing about the recovery?
You know, look, we're hurting. I mean, the storm hit us hard, and the entire Gulf Coast. It's 250 miles from Corpus to Louisiana, and it hit hard. But we're rebuilding. I mean, it was inspirational to see Texans come together. It was inspirational to see the sacrifice and courage. I think the face of Harvey will be the thousands upon thousands of Texans who just went out and saved their neighbors. As you know, I've called them rednecks and bass boats. I think it's the very best, the face of Texas. It also has been encouraging. The congressional delegation has been standing together and united. So, first major disaster relief came out of the House of Representatives at $7.5 billion. I joined with John Cornyn. We doubled that in the Senate to $15.25 billion. That passed into law to get money on an emergency basis to the people who were hurt in Texas. And then just 2 weeks ago, we passed major tax relief targeted at those who were hit by Harvey in Texas and Louisiana, and also those who were hit by Irma in Florida and Georgia, and those who were hit by Maria in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And it does several things. Number one, if you suffered damage in the hurricanes, you can immediately deduct the damages on your taxes without being subject to the ordinary limits of 10% of your adjusted gross income. Number two, you can withdraw from your retirement accounts, your 401k or your IRA, to rebuild without paying the 10% early withdrawal penalty. Number three, nationally, it incentivizes giving to charities that are doing hurricane relief between now and the end of the year. Those are not subject to the caps for individual charitable contributions or corporate. And number four, businesses that paid their employees during and after the hurricane. The employees couldn't come in when the businesses were shut down. There's a tax credit for those businesses that kept on paying the employees. That's legislation that I wrote with John Cornyn and Marco Rubio. And the Cruz, Cornyn, Rubio legislation passed both houses. Kevin Brady in the House introduced it, and the president signed it into law.
You voted against the final Sandy aid package. Some people would suggest and use the word hypocrite.
You know, it is not surprising in politics to see attacks. What I can say, what I said at the time of Sandy, of course, hurricane relief is an important and vital federal function. What happened with the Sandy bill is it got loaded up. It was over $50 billion, and it was loaded up. 70% of that was non-emergency spending. And it was things like, for example, funding for a fishery in Alaska. Now, I'm pretty confident that Hurricane Sandy, which hit the East Coast, didn't affect a fishery in Alaska. And so what I urged then, and by the way, just about an awful lot of Republicans voted the same way, we said, look, let's actually have a relief bill that is targeted to the victims of the hurricane. I think we should do the same thing for Harvey and Irma and Maria. Target the actual hurricane.
I'm glad you explained that because
well, you knew most of that. You knew about the fishery. You knew that the Republicans had a philosophical disagreement with it.
I think if you read some of the headlines recently, a lot of people didn't know the history
Senator,
of it.
Okay. Thank you,
Senator.
Thank you very much for being
here. And thanks, Senator.